Hi, Holly of Hollywood here at the Siskiyou Media Council in Siskiyou County, doing Hollywood Goes to Hollywood in the South Pacific 42 to 45, Part 2, A Light on History. Hindsight is 2020. My father, again, went to North Hollywood High School, graduated in 1942. I also went to North Hollywood High School, graduating many years later. And after that, he joined the United States Marines, not right away, but for various reasons he joined. And he smuggled his little puppy on the boat with him, and he was in the air wing of the United States Marines. And he was part of the liberation of the Philippines, the victory. And what I'm reading now is learning that history by reading this book, Rice and Salt. I've read MacArthur's Escape, and I'm seeing some of my father's writings in the margins where he's giving a message, as the person who wrote this book in 1962 is giving a message for all who will read, for all who have hears, to learn some of the lessons of history. And so hindsight is 2020. And the light of history shines so that we can learn from that vision that we're given by looking into the past, and also see how to apply our presence and into the future. When I was last here, I was with my daughter, who will be 20 in April of this year. And she's a student at UC Berkeley, at Cal. And she's discovered that she really didn't know much value to history. In fact, some of her teachers said, oh, you don't need to learn history. And she's learning and beginning to learn the value of history, as am I. And last Sunday, when I did this last, was the 19th of January, and today's the 2nd of February. But that evening, I invited a friend to come on with me this next show. And she was interested in coming, and she said yes, and she had experienced at the Bob Hope USO, and I've also been a volunteer at the Bob O. Hope USO, and although she wasn't a volunteer, she was paid there, and she originally came from Canada, and she came with her daughter, Susie, and her mother. Her daughter was born when she was 18 or 19 years old, outside of marriage, and she went with her most gracious mother and her daughter to Hollywood. And she got work in Hollywood, and she just loved the Hollywood industry. And so there's music and entertainment and everything good for the morale for the troops. And even as I'm reading these stories about the prisoners of war that my dad helped to liberate when we surrendered to the Japanese, even personal music was very helpful to keep up the morale, and the songs and the hymns and different things that the prisoners could do to keep their morale up. Well, my friend Loretta wanted to be on the show, and she said yes, and we spoke about her time at the Bob Hope USO, and we spoke about her uncles who were police officers in Canada. She was born in 1939 and died on 2020 in the year, she died the very next day, January 20th, 2020. So hindsight is 2020. And we look at these moments and we wish we had done things different, perhaps, that had precious moments. Perhaps Loretta didn't have regrets, but I, as her friend, have regrets that I wasn't more proactive in learning her stories, and perhaps kindly going with her for a fun drive that Sunday to the hospital just to have her checked out, this and that. But nonetheless, we're grateful for the time we had, and I'm grateful for the time we had, and I'm the same age as her daughter, and she was the same age as my mom, and my mom's still alive and well. Actually, maybe a couple years older, but still very alive and well. And I'm very grateful for my mother. At the same time, my mother's 600 miles away, and so I had Loretta as a friend, and she had me as a friend. And she's lost contact with her daughter, but her daughter is, Susie, is out there somewhere. And she has her sister and her brother-in-law who practically adopted Susie. And Loretta was originally born in Montreal, Canada. And she came here again when she was not 18 or 19, maybe I said that wrong, but when Susie was a little girl, they came here. And they started a new life in Hollywood. And we're in Siskiyou County now. But I would watch a bunch of old movies with Loretta and hear stories, and I got to see what Hollywood was more than even realize, even though my family was in the Hollywood industry and still is. And as the last 2 weeks before Loretta's passing, I went deep into the book of history of my father's history, and I wish now I would have been reading out loud to Loretta. She would have loved it. And so if she was here now, I'd be reading to her right now, or just, actually, I wouldn't be reading to her. She'd be telling you the stories live. In fact, she said, when she accepted to be on my show there on the 19th, she said, yes, she said, well, at this point, we just have to play it by ear. And ear means listening grace. And listening grace, the ear also has to do with the heart, being able to listen to the whispers of guidance. And I said, yes, Loretta, when you come here, we have to be delicate with you. And she laughed and she said, yes, delicate. And that's when she said, at this point, we just have to play it by ear. So I'm playing it by ear right now. And Loretta's in the wings somewhere. God knows, perhaps she's with my father and the United States Marines, lining the gates of heaven, and with her mother and her uncles, perhaps, with the patron saints of the police officers and the good guy, Army guys, Marines guys, soldiers, the legions of St. Michael the Archangel, the lovers of freedom. Loretta was a lover of freedom. And when I was reading this book about this rice and salt, when the man who wrote this book in 1962 was escaped finally from a Japanese prison camp after having surrendered, after having fought the good fight for individual freedom as well as for his troops' freedom, as well as for America and the free world, as the story goes. When he finally came to the point where he escaped by jumping off a boat, and the different stories there, at a certain time he got so disoriented that all he could do was play it by ear, meaning he had to depend on God, and he just had to have faith and still be wise and not exercise his knowledge, but there was so much danger going on. They had what was called kind of like the secret police. Here's a quote I'll read real quick. And my dad had written in the sidelines, "A free people's must." It says, the greatest evil of a secret police system is this type is not just its unjust punishment system, but this destruction of mutual trust between citizens in an enemy-occupied loyalty. Freedom from the secret police is another precious freedom that must be more fully understood and better appreciated by Americans. So Loretta was part of the neighborhood watch in Carrick Addition, as was her friend Carol. And it wasn't the secret police, it was common knowledge that we didn't want bad guys to harm us or the elderly or the weak, or to take advantage so much where things went awry really bad. So, but there was a neighborhood watch during the occupation of the Japanese in the Philippines, where the Japanese had neighbors telling on neighbors if anybody helped an American or helped anybody escape. And so that's what this former prisoner of war in his book Rice and Salt was mentioning. So when my father was there in a certain location in 1945 that he writes in this book, by his hand in the margins. Loretta was just 6 years old. She was a little girl, and I remember being 6 years old. I have a little neighbor who's actually 7 now. And we have a lot of memories, and somehow she got that patriotism, that her love of America, her love of freedom, very early on from her uncles, who were her guardian angels while they walked the earth, and her mother's guardian angel. Apparently her dad got a little rough at times with the booze, and the uncles came and said, "Hey, do not hurt our sister." And Loretta remembers that as a little girl. Loretta had sweet charity, although she was tough as nails sometimes, and she had that red hair, fiery red hair. But she had great, great love, great, great humanity. She, up until the end, she was wanting to sew and just do things to keep busy. She was still trying to, in fact, just a couple days before she died, she was coloring with a little neighbor boy who's 3 years old, just coloring with him and sharing joy and bringing joy and appreciating his joy and just being there. So we can all learn from the light of history. We have hindsight is 20/20, and one thing that I've learned recently is to not be so busy and not be so self-absorbed, so as to not spend that time with those who are weaker than us. You know, God, in the Proverbs or what have you, it says something about, or maybe it was St. Paul, that God gives us strength in our weakness. There's a quote in this book on rice and salt, and then I have this other book, Hidden Grace, Growing Through Loss and Grief. And so sometimes in our weakness, that's where God shows us strength. And Loretta was weak. She was weak physically. She needed a helper to help her walk. And she needed friends and family, but she did not want to be in a hospital environment or a nursing home environment. I have a friend who's in there now who broke her femur, and I noticed that when the buzzer buzzes, they take a long time to get to the people because they have so many people to attend to, kind of like maybe a more industrial situation than home. And Loretta died peacefully in her home. But I dedicate this show to her. I didn't mean to be talking all about her as the main part of this Holly of Hollywood episode, A Light on History. And I wish she was here to tell her stories. Perhaps in her journal she would tell more about her first experience in Hollywood and her coming here with her daughter Susie and her mother, and her communications with her uncles and her cousins, what have you, back in Montreal. So in this book, Rice and Salt, as I mentioned with my daughter on the 19th in our last show, they recommend that maybe once in a while, or at least on December 7th, that we fast on rice and salt. Recently I met a young girl who actually grew up in the Philippines. She grew up actually in Bataan, and she was so far away from history, she didn't see the value of knowing the history. She knew all the locations, but she said that it was so hard in the Philippines, they just think about moving forward. And that's the way my life has been for a long time, that it's been so hard, I can only put one step ahead of myself sometime, or one fence post at a time, or one court date, or what have you. But watching movies and reading these stories can help us perhaps get out of these drudgeries, these hard things, and learn these lessons and be able to share it somehow. And I can't really just read this book here on the screen because it would be really boring, and it would be actually wouldn't work. And so maybe it is good to be part of a reading study group on this topic of this history. I mean, there is so much in here, and so much between the lines, not just what my father wrote, but what is not written between the lines. And Loretta, again, was 19 or 18 years of age when Susie was born, and I guess she was in her early 20s. I don't know exactly when she moved to Hollywood. I moved out of Hollywood when I was in my early 20s, and I actually lost a child when I was Loretta's age, when Loretta gave birth to Susie. I lost it to the lie of my child, to the lie of Planned Parenthood, to the lie of Women Feminist Center, who said they had freedom, who said they had choice, who said they had education, who said they had counseling. And their only counseling was a lie to say that what you have inside of you is just the same as a missed period. And Loretta had, that was Father's Day 1978, or the day before Father's Day 1978. And Loretta, with her mother's help and her faith, she was born Catholic, and she was never uncommunicated, or whatever you call it, miscommunicated, not miscommunicated, I'm miscommunicating, whatever the word is, from the church.
Excommunicated.
Thank you. She was not excommunicated in my miscommunication. She was not excommunicated from the church, although she didn't practice going to the Catholic Church, but her faith and the experience with the nuns that she described a lot of sewing with the nuns and all that they taught her and all that they helped with when she was a little girl growing up until the time Susie was born and beyond, was really enriching for her. And it also helped her realize the obvious fact that when you have a child with you, when you have what you have conceived in liberty and love, even as a form of a love child, is indeed a gift of life. And Loretta, humbly, who was born in 1939, so what was it, 49, 59, 58, Susie may be a year older than I am, because I was born in 1959. She dared to have the child that I didn't have the courage to, but she also knew the truth. And she so loved life. At the same time, she believed in choice. And I never recommend suicide. And even as these people survived the prison camps that are horrendous to read about and these things, how they kept their morale up, that moral courage that they kept going. And same thing, they say that getting old is not for cowards. So Loretta was no coward. But I do know that sometimes a little morale booster, a friend, there's a wonderful saying that says, "Here, O God, I have found thee in the heart of the smile of a friend." And I see that Loretta was a friend. She even wanted to be a closer friend, but she was a friend. She was a friend of the friend. And yet, sure, sometimes friends in need, can be challenging, and we all try to get in this survival thing, but we have to look out for one another. And Loretta had her caregiver who came, and I gave the police the letter that she had written to me on Saturday, and they were in the practice of calling her every day to make sure she was okay. And I just wish that I had perhaps called the paramedics, or like I said, drove her to the clinic as a fun thing to do. And as I read about the prison life and the prisoner of war in 43, 44, 45, up until the time that my dad came with his Air Wing Division of the Marines, and there was the victory, the liberation of the Philippines, I see that there are great lessons, not just in the technical aspect of the history, but in the humanity of the history, the humankind. My dad's last written words to me was, "God said humankind," and he underlined the kind of humankind 3 times. And I had just discovered the internet at that time, and was just aware of the Facebook, and I forgot about the kind of humankind. And so as we play things by ear, and we develop that heart, we develop that listening grace. Years ago, I was given the freedom by my father, and my father's father, as the story goes, to be an American woman. And I remember he left me off at a trailhead one time, and I just told him, well, if you don't hear from me in 2 months, then you can begin worrying about me. And I would sing. And the only person who was listening to me was God, in God's ear. So there was no worry about my appearance or that I was a bad singer or not. God helped me practice so that I could become the gifted singer that later people told me that I was, but I'm out of the practice now. But I had the gift of song. And it was God who gave me that by his courage and by his love, and also my father's love. And as I read his little notes in there, and the notes of this author who wrote this in 1962, when I was just 3 years old, Dad says, true and dangerous now, caution now. He was wanting us to learn these things. And this was his gift to us as his tribute to his fellow Marines who gave their all and then some there just outside of Wairika off Oberlin Road with the raising of the flag of Viva Jima, although we need a new flag and the third figure there. And he has the crosses on the hill. So as we learn about history from the people who lived it, sure, maybe these people aren't perfect writers or perfect storytellers, and maybe some things can get boring, but we get little glimpses of that humanity and that humankind and what that moral courage is. There was even those people who had integrity within the Japanese guards, and those people who had like the demon come out of them. We have like what we call a Christ self or a true self or a real self, our God presence. And then we have that devil's self, the demonic self, the satanic or the sadistic aspect. And you can read that in the book, The Screw Tape Letters. And you could see that those who had that moral fortitude could endure certain things and could keep a smile while, certain things, and keep on keeping on, where some people would just lose it and would either go insane or become cruel themselves or go to the side of the enemy. So in any event, Loretta kept the flame of life. She kept the flame of freedom. And though she was Canadian by birth, she loved America. She was Hollywood through and through. She was Bob Hope, USO through and through. And she was an American patriot. And she also was a lover of those who protect our freedoms, our law enforcement officers, especially our dear Sheriff Lopi. So this story, Rice and Salt, is real well worth reading, but of course there's a lot to read that is good. And I hope that young girl who wasn't interested in reading her history, her grandfather just died last year and she had tears, and he was just 3 years old when this happened, these stories. And so we pieced together like a puzzle. Aha, Loretta was how old when she gave birth to her daughter, Susie? She was how old when she came to America? And now, at age 80, she gave up the ghost, so to speak, and she took her last breath. And on 2020, we don't have Loretta to smile at her. Again, here, O God, I have found thee in the heart and the smile of a friend, and in the heart and the smile of Loretta, I personally found a friend. And so I hope this is a lesson for me and for all those who hear to find their friend. It's giving them freedom and space, because people need their peace and they don't need someone bothering them all the time. But, what is that friend? As my dad wrote, God said humankind. So thank you. This is Holly of Hollywood here in Siskiyou County, an exile land of Weed, California. I'm an immigrant from Hollywood to Siskiyou County, from North Hollywood to Siskiyou County. I am American through and through, and that's about as deep as I can get, is to be an American. Yeah, I've got Native Californian in me, Native American, and I'm certainly Native California, so I can certainly be a Native American. And believe me, I can go Apache when I need to, or when it happens, so watch out. But I loved Loretta as a friend, and again, the fact that her daughter was the same age as me was significant. So thank you for letting me shed a little bit of light on history, and we're still trying to get more to the South Pacific, and Hollywood goes to the South Pacific, even as my father graduated from North Hollywood High School, 1942, did it. And the book he wanted to write was How Not to Win a Purple Heart. And that's the story I can tell you a little bit more another time. Thank you very much. And God bless America.